Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the second bi-weekly episode of the Gifts of Glory podcast. We changed it up recently. We're now going every other week, so you have more time to catch up on our great interviews, and also to allow me some extra time to focus on the many different projects that my wife and I are a part of. But my name is Dave Ebert, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you. Before we get into that, recently Well-Versed Comedy, our improv ministry, it actually traveled to Indianapolis suburbs to perform at GUTTY'S Comedy Club in Greenwood, Indiana. It was an exceptional weekend, and Dennis and Steve at GUTTY'S Comedy Club, they're just absolutely amazing guys, awesome to work with. Now, GUTTY'S is currently in a small business contest with a chance to win up to $50,000 in grants from FedEx. We've got the link in the show notes, so please be sure to vote for GUTTY'S Comedy Club each and every day and try to get them up to that $50,000 grant so that they can continue to provide great family-friendly entertainment in the Midwest there in the suburbs of Indianapolis. Now, while we were in Indianapolis, I got a chance to catch up with some friends that I know through Karitos. If you've never heard of it, Karitos is the Christian Arts and Worship Conference held annually in Chicagoland. Karitos is a phenomenal weekend, and it really did help inspire me along the journey to get to where I'm at now today with Gifts of Glory Ministries, with Well-Versed Comedy, and with PureFest. Zach and Susannah Francis are our guests. We'll tell you more about them in just a moment. But first, as we wrap up February and Black History Month, I wanted to encourage everyone to check out two amazing films. One is already out on DVD and Blu-ray and possibly in your online streaming platform. This one is called Harriet. It's the true story of the incredible Harriet Tubman and the start of the Underground Railroad. It's well acted, well told, and well worth a look to take a look back at some of the tragedy that is such a dark piece of American history. Not all of our history is sunshine and rainbows, so we should always take time to remember stories like Harriet Tubman. Currently in theaters is another movie that you should check out. It's called Just Mercy. It's starring Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. It's phenomenally done. Jordan and Foxx should definitely get some nods for nominations and awards for their performances in this true story. And this one takes place in the 80s. Not the 1880s, but the 1980s. So this story helps remind us that some of the tragedies of our nation's history are not so distant. So be sure to check out these films and take some time to really honor Black History Month as we wrap up this month. Now, as we move forward, let's get to our Devotions with Dave segment. Today we're reading from 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 11. So a larger chunk than we normally do on the Gifts of Glory podcast, but I really like this passage. 1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 11. There are different kinds of spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit is the source of them all. There are different kinds of service, but we serve the same Lord. God works in different ways, but it is the same God who does the work in all of us. A spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. To one person, the Spirit gives the ability to give wise advice. To another, the same Spirit gives a message of special knowledge. The same Spirit gives great faith to another. And to someone else, the one Spirit gives a gift of healing. He gives one person the power to perform miracles and another the ability to prophesy. He gives someone else the ability to discern whether a message is from the Spirit of God or from another spirit. Still another person is given the ability to speak in unknown languages, while another is given the ability to interpret what is being said. It is the one and only Spirit who distributes all these gifts. He alone decides which gift each person should have. And again, that's 1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 11. This passage was foundational in the creation of Ha 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 Men, which then became Ha Ha Men and is now Well-Versed Comedy. And it's really the foundation for much of what I've been doing the last 7 years since moving to Illinois to pursue ministry through creative arts, through performance and improv and comedy. It's that the same Spirit from the same God gives everybody a spiritual gift, a gift that's meant to help people, that's meant to serve, that's meant to make a difference in people's lives, and essentially to make a difference for the kingdom of God. So everyone has a gift. The Holy Spirit determines who gets what gift because there's a specific purpose. So if you have not found your gift, keep searching, keep seeking, keep praying. And if you found your gift but you're not using it to grow the body, to edify others, to encourage others, then I want you to really pray about how you can use your gifts. Because if you're in the sound of my voice, if you're still breathing and you're still in this body on this planet, that means you still have time and you still have a purpose that God has for you. And that's why the Spirit gives us these special gifts, so that in verse 7 it says, a spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. God has a huge and dynamic plan that involves all of us. So don't waste your gift. Don't let it lie on the sideline. Don't keep it on a shelf. Don't hide it under a bed. Pull it out and let God and let His Holy Spirit empower that gift and show you how to use it and where to use it and when to use it. And it may not make sense. Sometimes God calls us to do things that we can't see the purpose in, but He sees it. He's got that higher level vision, and He's got the plan. He knew the end from the beginning. So trust in Him, trust in the Spirit, trust in the Spirit's leading, and use these gifts. Don't let them sit idly by, because somebody somewhere needs you to be working with your gifts so that they can grow closer to God. So that when you deny yourself the ability to use your gifts, you're actually denying somebody a chance to get to know Jesus better. So take some time. If you're not already doing it, find those gifts that God has given you and find out what He wants you to do with them. And again, our passage is 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 11. The key one, again, was verse 7. A spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. So that is our Devotions with Dave segment. I hope it encourages you, hope it inspires you. And now let's get to our conversation with Zach and Susannah Francis. They're from One Heart Arts Ministries, based in the Indianapolis area. And as I mentioned before, they're also interim leaders of Karitos. We'll talk about their positions with Karitos right now when we get to the interview in just a moment. They're two great folks who love the Lord. They love the creative arts, and they work tirelessly to support and promote creative people within the body of Christ. And it was my honor to chat with them, and I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. And then be sure to check out One Heart Arts and make plans to attend Karitos this summer. And now on to our conversation with Zach and Susannah Francis on the Gifts for Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts for God's glory.
Welcome back to the Gifts for Glory podcast. Dave Eber now joined by the founders of One Heart. Is it One Heart Arts?
Yes, One Heart Arts Ministries.
Okay, let me take two. I'm sorry. And we're now joined by Zach and Susannah Francis, the founders of One Heart Arts Ministries, and also Susannah is the acting executive director of Karitos. Zach is the vice president of Karitos, and we'll tell you what Karitos is in just a moment. But Zach and Susannah, welcome to the Gifts of Glory podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We're really glad to have you guys on. So let's dive in. What is One Heart Arts? What is the vision behind it?
Well, One Heart Arts actually started, the name came from a praise team that we started back in 2006. Or was it 2009? 6, okay. Sometimes I transpose those numbers. But okay, well, it was around there. But we started, we had an arts ministry. We had the heart to have an arts ministry, but at the time we just were starting a praise band. I'm a singer. And so we started this praise band, and we were kind of coming from all different perspectives. We were different denominations. We weren't necessarily all even interested in the same style of music. And we were trying to come up and pray about a name, and the Lord moved one of our members of the team. He said, well, I was just kind of saying, this is kind of where we're trying to go with the name. And he pulled one of the words that out of my little paragraph of what my explanation of what I thought God was saying our group was. And he said, well, what about One Heart Arts? Or One Heart is actually what it was initially, with just the praise band. And so the idea is that we're just all coming from the same place, but we're focused on the same thing, which is Christ. So
And you've kind of moved on from the praise to more productions.
We started with the praise team. Shortly thereafter, we started Artist Bible Study. And then my husband is a playwright, and so we produced a production under that name eventually as well. So we did theater and the praise team, and the Artist Bible Study is kind of how it began.
I would argue that, this is why we had a debate about where it started, 2009 or 6, because honestly in 9, the ministry kind of transformed. I would argue that it started in 2006. I don't think it may have not been called One Heart Arts, but really the ministry started at that point. And the transition, the first 4 years of the ministry, for the most part, we're dealing with basically, what do we offer? So at that time, it was drama theater productions. And then, at the beginning, it also dealt with the praise team. But back in 2009, one of the worst things to ever happen to us occurred, which actually became one of the best things for our ministry, is we had a play production blow up on dress rehearsal.
Oh, no.
And so it was one of the worst experiences ever. We had an individual who, I'm not going to share what they revealed, but they revealed something that actually caused other individuals to leave. And it was very, very difficult. I myself was super angry at God when that happened, because at that time I felt like it was, my place to bring people to Christ. It was my place to save their souls. And there was all these individuals that never went to church that were going to go to this production the next day, and I had to cancel. And it was very upsetting for me. And the thing happened, the best thing that happened out of that is, of all the people that were involved up to that point, we only had 2 that have served since in our ministry. Everybody else, most of them now, we're friends with them. It took a little while on some of them to be friends again, but we only had 2. So basically, the whole thing burned up. And so we were basically starting from scratch. And when something like that happens, it causes you to have a lot of time to pray and reflect. And I remember after about 6 months, my eyes went to Philippians 2, and especially the aspect that it talks about, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves, that your attitude should not be the same as Christ Jesus. That should be, thank you, not should not be, thank you. That should be the same, not should not. That should be the same as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality to be God something to be grasped, but rather became obedient, even obedient to death on the cross. Then it goes on to say, and then, so therefore God exalted to a higher place, gave him a name above all names. And I read that, and I talked to Susannah after I just really saw that, and I said, what if you change that to putting ministry in there? Instead of saying, Jesus, because we're supposed to reflect Jesus. Ministry should be reflecting of Jesus. So, we shouldn't be doing anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And then therefore, becoming obedient to what he commands. And then God will exalt, just like God exalted Christ to the higher place, God will exalt the ministry to the higher place. The end of that is very important. It says it's to the glory of the Father. And so it really hit me. Does God exalt the humble and the ones that serve others, because it's all about the kingdom. It's not about that individual. And that we've had it wrong because we weren't doing things for other people. We were doing it for ourselves. And even with this idea that it was my responsibility to bring people to the cross, I realized that isn't. It's my responsibility to serve, and it's God's responsibility to bring people to the cross. And I just need to serve and help other people. And at that point, we started looking around, and we started seeing other artists that really needed discipleship and connection. And it was about 2 weeks later, I said, I want to try this little theory out of, caring about other people first. And not that I didn't care before, but it was this idea that before, it's like, God gave me this vision. Why aren't you on my train? And it's
right.
different mentality. What is your train? What does your train look like? What do your seats look like? And so we went there, and this is a long time ago now, and we went in this meeting, and before that, we would always spend 2 hours talking about ourselves. And instead we said, what do you do? They just started talking. Talked and talked and talked. We asked questions. They talked. And after about 2 hours, they got confused. I said, well, what do you do? We talked a little bit. Not much. Nothing came from that meeting. But then about a week later, we had something happen, some circumstances where we ended up praying for an individual that happened to be, and we didn't even know at the time, happened to be the founder of AMTC, Actors, Models, and Talent for Christ. And we didn't even know at the time. We were going because we saw that AMTC was in the area, and typically, even at that time, we like to go and see what was there for Christian artists to make sure. Honestly, I was trying to see if it was a sham because I didn't want to. I wanted to see what the organization was about, and so we went in there, and it's like, "Oh, so are you auditioning?" No, we're not auditioning. We would just like to see your program. Is that okay? I guess so. Yeah, are you sure you don't want to be a singer or a dancer, go to Hollywood? No, that's not our interest. We lead other artists. We wanted to see what you do here. And so there was this person in the hallway, and she was talking about how they just transitioned to a Christian organization and how it's been so hard and everything else. And I just started feeling led to prophesy over her, and I prayed over her. But that was the founder of the organization. And though those two things weren't related, I felt like they were.
Right.
I felt like one led to another. And our journey has been like that ever since. And so I felt like One Heart turned into a sign that says, hey, I want a relationship with you.
Yeah.
But I can't have a booth that says, want relationships.
Who just set one up at AMTC?
Didn't say that, did it?
Didn't we pray for you?
Yeah. But it didn't work very well. So we continued to do the praise team. I'm sorry. We continued to do the praise team. I still feel led to do theatrical productions, but those were more vehicles to say, Lord, who are you bringing?
Right.
Who are you bringing? And you know what? All of that happened because the play blew up. And for me, I felt like that was the biggest blessing that has ever happened to us, because we have seen bigger organizations. We have seen stronger organizations that are terrified of death. Terrified. There's this organization in Indianapolis. I'm not going to name anything. That's fine. But they had this one individual who was so caught up in serious sin, and was mean to everybody. And they said, well, we can't get rid of that person. They have this very valuable skill. We can't. The skill that they had was something that's hard to replace. And so they never talked to her about her sin. They never approached her. They just let her treat people the way because she was willing to work for them for free. And they felt like if they lost her, the organization would die. And
almost ignoring the fact that she was actually killing it from within.
Yes, because they were holding on too tight. But it's this idea of being afraid of the fire. Being afraid. I mean, people like to talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but the thing is, when they got into the oven, if they wouldn't have gotten into the oven, they wouldn't have had the experience of Jesus being in there with them.
Right.
People like to talk about Esther going to the king, but she had to get over the idea. She had to be prepared to say, if I come to the king, they're going to kill me. Most likely they'll kill me. They may not, but if I die, I die. You have to go through this gives you the courage to just be like, death isn't so bad. And if you think about things that way, it brings a freedom, and I think it allows you to go more into God's will with your organization. And that's what happened with One Heart. It provided a freedom, and it actually transitions us. I think One Heart is more now of a discipleship ministry. And yes, we do other things, productions. We do a praise team. That's what we offer. But really the offering is just an undercurrent for the people that God leads to us to minister to long term. And we've gone to Florida to pray for somebody. That's it. Because God told us to. I mean, that's just what we do.
It's like in some of these foreign countries where, Christianity is not necessarily welcome. You do a coffee house or you do something, and that's your getting somebody in the door and then you build the relationship and that's where the ministry actually happens.
Yeah.
It's almost a missionary work that you're doing.
Absolutely. And when we were doing a play production, after a few years after the situation Zach was talking about where our production shut down very quickly, we were doing a play production, and our pastor, we were doing it in the church we were at currently. And I remember he just really opened our eyes when he called out what he saw us doing, because we were like, we're doing a play. He's like, no, you're shepherding. You're shepherding. And that's when we finally had a word that we understood why our hearts were so bent on trying to help each person that was in the production. We were more concerned about the people and the individuals that were in the play than what was being presented on stage. I mean, we were concerned with the audience and what they were going to receive, but we were really concerned with the people that we were developing. And we started to realize that the Lord was opening the doors. And just like Zach said, you can't put a sign out literally and say, hey, we want a relationship with you. We did find that we could put audition notices out, and God would lead the people that he was calling us to connect with. And that's exactly what happened. Is we started connecting with people. We started walking the journey with people. As time went on, we started, just developing more and more relationships where we could walk right next to somebody and take the journey with them. Maybe they didn't have a church that quite understood what they were called to, and they needed someone that kind of understood and got it. And we've been able to be those people, praying with people in the middle of the night, just praying with them, going to funerals, going to weddings, just being family.
I would argue with that, that we always strive for excellence in everything that we do. I'm not going to undercurrent that. I think it's very important. However, sometimes excellence takes a backseat to discipleship. We've had productions where somebody is in our production and they did well in their audition, and suddenly they have a vocal role and they can't sing. But we figure this out later in the thing. And technically, if you want to increase the quality of your production, you say, "Look, buddy, you can't sing. We need to bring somebody in." But you need to value that against hurting that person's relationship with that individual long term. Like, well, they'll get it. I don't know. What is God saying? God has told us to have an individual in there that's 80 years old that could never memorize her lines. Man, my goodness, you want to talk about how many line memorization things I did with her? And at the end, she still didn't know all her lines. And what was in the complaint box? Why did you pick somebody that didn't know all their lines? But you know what? All of her kids came who had never been to church, and they were, what did they say? Oh my goodness, how did you know so many lines? And it ministered to them. So did God do it for that audience? Did you do it for those 4 boys? Yeah.
And for her, I mean, not that she didn't have a good relationship with her children before that, but they got to see her in something she loved and something they had never gotten to see her use her gifts in that way. And it encouraged her that she may be in her 70s, her 80s, but she has so much more left to give. And she was like our prayer warrior during the play production, talking about things, because we always had a prayer room, and she was, an absolute necessity in that way. So yeah, it's a cool journey when God takes you that way, and you're not necessarily focused on necessarily even the outcome, but just the journey through it. Yeah. Because,
and let's face it, 10,000 years from now, a play production that we put together is not going to matter, no. But who it ministers to is going to matter.
Absolutely.
So you guys have been doing One Heart Art since 2006, 2009, somewhere in there. And it was 2014 that you first came to Karitos, or what year was that?
No, that same year that we were talking about, where the play production, that was a very pivotal year for us. I also was having some major health issues that kind of came to a head, and I had to leave my full-time position. The whole time the Lord had been speaking to me privately for the last year or two before that, saying that I was going to be called into ministry, and I didn't really understand exactly what he was saying. I just assumed I was going to be a music minister because I was a singer. But God probably laughed at me when I told him that's what it was. And but anyway, that was the same year that I was called out of work, and I was I couldn't just sit and do nothing.
Right.
And we had a mutual friend that had I think it was an associate pastor. It was his role. And he was just needing some extra help. He was a music minister as well. And so he needed some help just organizing choir music and stuff like that. And so I just volunteered after I had lost my professional position due to my health issues. I could go and do a little bit during the week. So I would take one day a week and I would go and work at the church. And he became kind of a mentor to me. And as I said, I thought the Lord was calling me into ministry, and I thought it was going to be music ministry. And so I was kind of trying to glean as much as I could from this music minister.
Mm-hmm.
And he just prayed with me. He talked with me. We were going through a really hard transition with our own church at the time. And we just started really laying it out before God. And what is it you want? And at that time, God just shifted a lot of different stuff. Mm. And so my position ended, and I was doing this work with the music minister, and he suggested that we maybe look into going to some conferences, just to try to get out there and really try to understand what God's asking us to do. Because, by this time I had shared what had happened with the play production and all of that. That had happened maybe a month before. And so it was all very fresh. And he suggested we do that. And I started looking, and almost every conference he suggested I look into had closed. And so I just kept Googling and found that there was an organization, a conference that happened up in Chicago that had both playwriting and singing, as among other things. And so I begged, literally, my husband to go up there. And that's how we found Karitos, is we Googled. I Googled, and then I tried to talk my husband into it.
4 hours. 4 hours was all I would agree to, because I did not want to go to this boring snore fest called the Karitos Worship and Arts Conference. You have the word conference, all I want to do is go to sleep. The idea of going, and I don't care what my wife says. I don't listen to my wife anyway. That's just how it is.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I'll probably get out of the room.
Oh,
right
so
now.
This podcast is now turning into an intervention.
Yeah. Sure is. But, I went, and I made sure that there was enough stuff around it that we were only going for 4 hours. And so we went to the classes. The classes were pretty cool. There was one, I remember that year, by Phil Hoagland. He taught how to use props from like everyday things like aluminum foil and that was kind of interesting. Oh, that's all right. And I don't remember the other class, but that really wasn't. If that was all it was, I probably would have just been like, yeah, that's nice. And I would have maybe gone back if I needed some tip, but it wasn't something that would be like super appealing. But as I was walking out the door, I looked in a window of the sanctuary, and I saw people dancing while people were laying on the floor, while people were painting. Vivian was up there prophesying for the Middle East, and all of these people were doing all these different things, and I thought, what a bunch of loonies. I was just, but I wanted to go in there. They all seemed so loony that I wanted to see what was going on. Time to go. And so I really wanted to go the next year. And so the next year we went for 3 days, and in those 3 days I had a particular thing that I was struggling with sin-wise, and I had gone to the altar I don't know how many times. And it was like that song, The Altar and the Door. I would be crying as I go up there, lay my face down, and I go out and I do the same thing again. The particular thing was God had been convicting me not to watch and read certain things. And for me, especially reading, I was just like, look, why does it matter? But I would feel bad about it. I go up there and then I cry and then I go back and read. And so when I went up to Karitos, it was the first time, because everybody was doing worshiping in such a unique way as an artist, because artists are unique. Eccentric, I like to call them, and that nobody was focusing on you. So in my home church, I have to be careful because I don't want people to focus on me, because they're no longer focusing on God. They're focusing on me. So I I can't hop on one foot. I can't run around in a circle. I can't lay on the ground because then everybody's going to look at me and they're not going to look at God. But there, people were hopping. They were looking at the ground. They were laying down. They were drawing pictures. So I could hop. I could lay on the ground. Nobody would care. Nobody would look at me. Now, I'm not saying without righteousness. I mean, I'm not sitting there taking my clothes off. That's not what I mean. I'm saying I got to worship there the way God created me exactly for the first time. And what happened with that is I had conversations with God I never had before. So after about the second day, Bob Sorge was there speaking, and he was talking about the gates and the inner gate. And I remember at the end, I was so close to God that I went up and I talked about that same sin. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, please help me, I said, I don't want to fix it. Never said that before. I said, I don't want to fix it. I like doing this. I don't really see a reason why you're asking me not to. I don't see a purpose. I don't see how it hurts anybody. I mean, I'm enlightening myself. I don't understand. And so I had this long conversation, but it was an honest conversation.
And when you have that first honest conversation, that's when God can finally deal with it.
Yes. Because when you don't have an honest conversation, he can't get into your heart and fix the problem. So within about 15 minutes, I was on my knees. About another 15, I was on the floor, and I was in tears. And by the end of the night, I went over and I said to my wife, I'm sorry I led our family in this direction, because it wasn't just me that was affected. We watched things at home. We all did. Mm-hmm. All two of us at that time. Joel wasn't around. And I said, I'm sorry we led our family in this direction. Never struggled with it since.
Nice.
And it transformed our marriage. It transformed our ministry. I mean, it transformed who we are. I would argue to say, wouldn't you, that that was a pivotal changing point with our marriage, when we didn't do some of that stuff anymore that were triggers of sinful things in our past. Yeah. And so for me, all of that wasn't that Karitos was any more special than anything else. I didn't think that at the time. What I did think was Karitos I saw as such a uniquely structured organization that it reached to an artist in a way where they could connect with God in a way they couldn't in their home church. And I felt like there was power in that, and that other artists need to be exposed to it so they could bring that back to their home church, because they probably can't get that in their home church. And there's just something to be said about having an environment where you can worship the way God made you, at least for 1 day a year, or 2 days a year, or 4 days a year. Because you can have conversations and you can understand things about your relationship with him, and he can talk to you in ways that can then bleed over to the people he's called you to in your own local communities. And for me, that's what got me hooked to the organization.
So one thing that just popped in my head that I think maybe warrants addressing is that there are a lot of Christians out there that don't understand, I guess you call charismatic worship, where you're able to scream, shout, dance. They're more, I guess you would say, traditional or whatever. What would you say to them? Are they welcome at Karitos, or is this something they should avoid? What would you say to them?
Well, I grew up in a traditional church. I grew up in a small little country church. I didn't really grow up in church, but it was the closest thing to my home church. And so, I mean, you didn't even clap. I mean, in the songs, even the really good ones, you didn't even stand and clap. You sat in your pew, and that's how you worshiped. And so when I was exposed to Karitos, it was very different. But I think for me, because I sincerely was trying to better understand how the Lord made us as worshipers, it wasn't overwhelming in the fact that I wasn't being expected to do anything. I mean, no, there was nobody dragging me out of my seat, asking me to do something out of my comfortable, my comfort zone. We've even brought people from the Indianapolis area. We were trying to get people to come up, and there were some people that came from more traditional areas, and I think it was different for them, but I don't think it was scary for them because of the fact that they weren't asked to do anything that was out of their comfort zone. They were allowed to be who they are too. And I think that's one of the things. I think you can be in that environment as long as you're not necessarily feeling like you're being expected to be different than who you really are. I mean, everybody should be able to worship. Freedom is freedom. Mm-hmm. We're not asking people to be less free if that's how they feel worship is.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I did recording it. So much more to share in just a minute. So I don't know how much time you spend on social media or watching the news or browsing news websites, but this world is full of bad news. Sometimes it's downright ugly. We need distractions. We need something that's uplifting. That's what Well-Versed Comedy is all about. Well-Versed Comedy is clean, family-friendly comedy, reaches across generations, across socioeconomic boundaries. We're about bringing people together and sharing the joy and the hope of laughter. So whether you have an outreach event, a birthday party, youth lock-in, conferences, corporate event, date night event, whatever the case may be, let us bring that clean, family-friendly comedy to you. All of our shows are 100% original. They're one of a kind because our show is your show. The audience drives it through suggestion and participation, so every show is completely unique and guaranteed to bring laughter and memories for everybody involved. So let us come down and craft a show with your audience. Information at wellversedcomedy.com. That's wellversedcomedy.com, or email us improv@wellversedcomedy.com. More of the Gifts of Glory podcast coming right up as we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts, talents, and passions to honor and glorify God.
I mean, everybody should be able to worship. Freedom is freedom. Mm-hmm. We're not asking people to be less free if that's how they feel worship is. And so it is different. It's out of the box. You want to come expecting what is going to be different, but I don't necessarily think that it should be scary. I think it should be free, just in the way that, he's saying it's free for him. It should be freedom for everybody to worship however they want.
And as Zach pointed out earlier, I think it's an important point that everyone's focus is on the Lord and making that connection directly to the Lord.
Exactly.
So however you want to be, if you want to be just sitting in your chair silently, just singing along or whatever, or if you want to be up waving a flag, it's all acceptable because it's all scriptural. That's how they worship throughout the Word.
Absolutely. And one of the beautiful things about Karitos is because people are coming out of classes and workshops where they're, developing their gifts. You have visual artists that are sitting there with their sketchbook and they feel comfortable. They don't feel like anybody's watching them or disproving of the fact that they're sketching during worship time. That's how they're worshiping. You have people that are photographers that are walking around with cameras, taking pictures, people with video cameras, taking videos. That's their expression of worship, and that's okay. And so it's not the jumping up and down. I mean, that's for some, but it's not what everybody's doing.
I want to emphasize, I have been to Holy Spirit-filled churches where it follows a very ritualistic dogma, and they're very quiet, and they have, they pray silently or they pray in unison. And God is everywhere. I have been to charismatic churches where people are hopping around, and it is the most dead church I've ever been to. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the misnomers that we do as believers is we point to that kind of, I think the enemy can get there and point to something we're unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with and say it is not of God. And I think you always need to look at the fruit that's inside, because honestly, there are plenty of churches of all types that God is there, and He is worship, and He is present. And there are churches of all types where God is not there, and it is dead. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we always have to be cautious with that, because too many times we point to a certain style, and we say that that's not right. I would argue that I agree with Susannah completely. It's a free environment, but there might be some people that I would argue that because of what their struggles with or their background, that Karitos might not be for them. I don't think you should ever go to anything that pulls you away from God. And I think that's very, very important. Just like the joke is that I love our church, but I would never ask our church, I would never bring Karitos to our church because our church isn't ready for something like Karitos. And that's not a bad thing, Because if we brought Karitos to our church, it would be a selfish reason, because I believe there are enough people that are so unused to that kind of environment that it would pull them away from God. But I have seen plenty of people that have come from church environments that are more quiet, and they've been fine at Karitos because we're not forcing them to do anything. I've seen plenty of people that just sit in their seat and read, draw. We had a girl, and to me, this is what Karitos and why it's important. We had an individual that we ministered to for years, and she got admonished in her home church because she liked to draw. That's how she connected with Jesus. And there were some elders in that congregation. There was one well-meaning but misunderstanding how she assumed she was goofing off. And he looked at her and he said, "Stop doodling. You need to stop doodling in the church." So he was admonishing her connection to Jesus because she was drawing. And to me, that's the power of Karitos. Karitos has the message, we know God has made you uniquely. We don't care if you relate by drawing a picture, by writing a poem, by sitting in your seat, by dancing around. It's not really about charismatic as much as it's about being an artist. So,
and that's one of the things that we mentioned before we started recording. Randall Flynn, he was somebody that's been a part of Karitos for a few years. He gave a testimony about being the orphaned artist, where he finally gave his life over to God. He's a dancer, and that's how he expressed his love of the Lord, is through dance. And he went up for prayer one time, and an elder, maybe very well-meaning, said, "Well, let's pray to see what else the Lord may have for you other than dance." And it made him an orphan artist. And you look at the creation, God is ultimately creative. So why would we, in his image, be any less creative? And I think that the church is slowly starting to warm up to that. And I think some of it's because there's been abuse of giftings like that. But I think that the church is finally, as a whole, starting to see that there's a need for creativity in the church. And I think that's why Karitos, One Heart Arts, the things that we're doing with Gifts of Glory are so important. So I want to jump back a little bit and just kind of give us your testimony. Susannah, you've got the mic. Tell us a little bit about how you came to know the Lord.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I never really grew up in the church. I did frequent the church periodically. I went with other family members, not necessarily who I was living with, but so I knew who Christ was, but I didn't really have any kind of relationship. I didn't really even understand that he wanted to have a relationship. I just never had that really exampled. And so when things got really hard, I was a divorced kid from divorce. And so there were a lot of challenges. And when I finally ran away from home, the responsible way, by going to college, I really got hit with all the temptations, all the challenges, and, really everything was thrown in front of me. And I found that there were a lot of things that I was prone to latching onto. And one of them was I was very sensitive spiritually, and I found myself very drawn to the occult. And so I did get involved in the occult at a low level, I guess, at first. It was first through horoscopes. It was something so harmless, so common, which turned into almost an obsession with trying to understand how people are made through their date of birth and things like that, and just a lot of deception that I was exposed to in that way. And that opened the door to me eventually getting involved with tarot cards and runes and other things. And, the enemy loves to take that foothold and just keep exposing you to more and more. And I found myself in a different city. I found myself dropped out of college and, all the makings to really lead you down the wrong path. And I needed something to make myself feel like I had some kind of contribution. So I got involved in some pretty bad stuff. I got involved in drugs. I got involved in drinking. I got involved in promiscuity. I got involved in a lot of stuff that I'm not proud of. But God, when I was in the deepest, darkest place, had been really involved in a lot of things that were very dark, that people really only hear about on movies and TV shows. I experienced firsthand of dealing with demonic oppression and things like that, and possession. And I know it to be very real. So, that's one thing that God definitely deposited in me through that journey, was to definitely recognize the truth of the demonic realm. And but in that time, I was just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, but I remembered that Jesus supposedly cared for us. And I remember so vividly, just in the darkest moment of my life, everything seemed to be crushing and crashing around me in every respect. And I remember just crying out to God and saying, God, please help me. Please help me. And it didn't necessarily, I'm a pretty stubborn person, so it wasn't like it was done right overnight. But I started reading I started reading the Bible with the intention of not necessarily, sadly, not necessarily trying to get closer to God, but I actually decided that I didn't want to be a Christian anymore. But I'm one of those people, I can't just say I don't believe in the Bible. I have to read the Bible to make sure I don't believe in it. Well, God also takes his points and opportunities to reach your heart. And the Bible came alive to me. I remember sitting in a room, and literally I was reading of all chapters. I was reading the chapter of Numbers. I was reading the book of Numbers, and I was in chapter like 4 or 5 where, begat. And the Bible came alive to me. Like literally you hear people talk about the Bible is alive, and it literally did. It leapt off. I don't even know how begats leapt off the page, but they did. And I had that experience, and it was so profound. And I remember then starting to read the Bible with new eyes, trying to understand what it really was saying. And I remember reading in the Bible that God is love. And that just hooked my heart, because that was the thing I was feeling so lack of. There were so many things crashing around me. There were so many difficult situations happening in my family and around my circumstances and just everything. And I was just feeling everything but loved. And then to hear God is love, and I wanted to know more about that. And so it was a journey. I actually, again, not the most easy to get through person, was very stubborn. It actually took a major health issue that brought me back to Indianapolis, because I was living in a different city at the time. And I came to Indianapolis and ended up moving in with my grandmother because of the health issues. I had lost like 20 pounds in 1 month because of my health issues at the time. And she invited me to go to church with her, which happened to be the small little church we were talking about earlier. And the Lord just met me there.
Nice.
The Lord met me there. He answered my questions. He showed me that he was love. And I felt loved for probably one of the first times. Not that nobody loved me before, but that I actually knew how to receive it. And he healed me. My illnesses and everything slowly got better. And it was a journey where I started to realize who I was really made to be, and that I wasn't just here to try to survive, which is what I had fallen into, that belief, is that I was just here to survive, but that I actually had gifts to contribute. And they weren't just for people to clap and make me feel better on the inside when I sang or something. I actually could move people. I could actually impact people. And that's when, I would say the journey really began, was when I finally realized that God loved me and that that's who he was. And, and then shortly thereafter, just to kind of work into how I met my husband, I was at my grandma invited me to, attend. If I went to church with her, I had to go to Sunday school. And so that was really hard for me because I felt like people are going to figure me out. They're going to figure out my past, they're going to kick me out that door as quick as can be. And, but that wasn't the case. They just wanted to love me. And eventually I went to an event And it really transformed my life, because that's when I found out about a Bible study that was happening. And make the story short, I ended up meeting my husband at that very same Bible study.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how God pursues us even when we run from him. And
and kick and scream and throw things. Yeah.
It's like the alternative version of footprints in the sand. There's two sets of footprints, and suddenly there's one set of footprints in a long trench where we're being dragged. So, Zach, give us your testimony. How did you come to know the Lord?
Well, I didn't go to church as a child much at all. And my church experiences as a kid, probably about 3 or 4, weren't positive. I went to one church. I actually remember these experiences very well. I don't remember much as a kid, but I remember those. I remember once I went to church, and it was always about hell. I was going to hell because I watched television. They told me, I told my, what's your favorite show? Oh, I watch the Smurfs. Oh, that's bad. Oh, you're going to hell. And I'm like, but I like the Smurfs. I'm only like 6. I mean, what am I supposed to do? And then I went to another church, and I was going to hell if I eat breakfast. I said, but I love breakfast. I don't know where these things come from. Who knows? But they ate breakfast afterwards, but they couldn't eat breakfast before church. I'm like, again, I it's like, I remember my journey started really from a chain reaction of different events. One of them in particular also dealt with the topic of hell. And I got into this debate with somebody. I don't know if it really was a debate. It was more of a condemnation. I don't really appreciate how she approached it. But she did say something that was very important at the end that was a part of my journey. She was talking about how I would go to hell, and then she gave me a phone number of somebody to call to prove that I was going to hell. And I'm like, sure, I'm going to call them, right? But then she said something that I thought was kind of fascinating. She said, "You're not in control of your own life." Really? And that, I mean, I'm a writer, but I'm also a scientist. And as a scientist, I thought that was an interesting hypothesis. So you're telling me that I have a list of morals and values that will be flexible if I don't follow God. That's right. I don't know if I believe you. But it was interesting. Mm-hmm. And it kind of stewed around there when I was in high school. And so when I was in college, an opportunity came for me to pick friends that I would define as some of the most morally compromising people with my definition of morals. Because I did have my own definition of what was right and wrong that I would find. And I was trying to prove my hypothesis, the hypothesis being that I could keep my list of morals and values in check that I define as good and wrong, good and bad, while hanging out with people that have a completely different set of morals and values. And so I had a few that were really dead in stone. One, I don't hit women. I don't yell at women. Another, I don't drink and drive. And I had a bunch of others, but those were a couple of key ones. And these individuals were very interesting. I could go in a long story about the culture behind people that drink and use drugs, because I had an individual where I would go up to their friends in Michigan, and literally these people were sober, and they would have conversations about how old they needed to be before they told their kids they smoked dope. 4, 5, 3. I mean, literally that was their conversation. Or isn't it awful that the cops pulled me over again for drinking and driving the other day? They are so against us. They are so against us drinking. And I mean, they just target us. Isn't it awful? I mean, literally, they believe this stuff. And they weren't drunk when they were talking about it. They weren't on drugs when they were talking about it. This was their normal conversation. So it was a whole culture. And this is what I was around for a couple of years. And what I found in that process was I started being involved in situations where I would be asked to make a choice that I would define as loving through my moral compass, but I would break another law that was also part of my moral compass. So let me give you for instance. I would be out with one of my friends. She's a girl. She would get wasted every weekend. She would be at a bar. She'd get a guy. Okay, I don't want this guy. This guy might kill her if she goes in the car with this guy. So I have a choice. They're both drunk. I could either stay away and not approve of them drinking and driving, or I could stay in the car and approve of their drinking and driving. At least I'm there to make sure he doesn't kill her.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of situations I started being in every week. So it kind of hit me. My morals changed by getting kind of hit from the backside.
Mm-hmm.
So I was asked to make one moral compromise to verify another one of my morals. Like, I don't want women to get hurt, so I'll do the other. And by the end, I had found myself in situations where I had hurt women. I had been involved in drinking and driving. I literally was sitting there every morning and saying to this God I didn't believe in, thank you that I haven't killed anybody today.
Mm.
Thank you that I haven't killed anybody today. I would say this every day. And then the pinnacle where this question from high school came back up was there was a particular friend, and it was a big mistake to decide to live with this individual, but I chose to. And she took a lot of drugs, and when she took drugs, she had these moods that would just swing from stoic to just angry in like 1 second. Like, she would be just like totally comatose, and then she'd flip out. That's what she did. That's just what she did. And then she found out, she was asking if I wanted to move to Michigan with her. And I had a bad feeling about that, because I felt like if I moved up there, I was going to die. Like being around people in that culture, I thought it was just a death sentence for me. I was already down this road. I had a good feeling about it. And I said, I didn't think I would. And so she came up to me, and she had this big, thick ring on her hand. She said, you don't like to hit women, right? And I said, no, I don't believe that's right. And so she punched me in the face. She said, hit me. I said, I don't hit women. So she punched me again. She said, hit me. I said, I don't hit women. She punched me again. Kept punching me in the face. The ring really hurt. And she kept punching and punching and punching. And it was around 3 a.m. And she realized this wasn't working. So she tried something a little more sneaky. She said, I'm going to call your parents at 3 a.m. And I didn't want this lunatic calling my parents at 3 a.m. And so I did it. I started beating her. And I beat her, reminded me of like beating somebody like Rodney King. It's a girl, like totally broke every single moral I had. And I left that house that day, and I was so mad. I was so mad that she manipulated me. In my mind, she manipulated me into that breaking of a moral. So I wanted to get back at her so much that I decided I was going to mock a suicide to make her feel bad, because if I tried to commit suicide, then she would feel bad about her actions. I mean, it's so crazy. So I went to the store, I got some Clorox, I came back. I didn't want to die, but I wanted to try to pretend to commit suicide or even attempt suicide so she would feel bad. So I went in there, and I had that, and she was all drugged up, could care less that I came back. And I said, I'm gonna go kill myself. And she told me to do it. Just do it. Just do it. And then I did. And by the way, everybody out there, this is what you don't do. So then it's about 4 a.m, and I call a friend from high school that is a Christian. This is what you don't do. Listen up. I called them. Well, can we just talk about this tomorrow? Like, I'm not doing well. I'm not doing well. Yeah, that's late. If somebody calls you at 4 a.m. and their voice is shaking, and they say, maybe you should listen a little, because when I got off the phone, she told me to do it again, and that's when I drank it. So I drank the Clorox, I got rushed to the hospital, and I'm sitting in the hospital bed, and I'm trying to rationalize to the doctors. I'm trying to say, no, you don't understand. I really wasn't trying to kill myself. I was only trying to pretend to kill myself to make somebody feel bad. And I realized I'm sounding nuts. I'm sounding nuts. And that whole conversation from high school came back. I hadn't remembered it in years. You're not in control of your own life. And I realized I was going down the road of the devil. And I said, I don't want to serve the devil. And from that point forward, that's when I started going to church, because I wanted to go the opposite direction. I was the first person in my family really to go to church in a long time. Went by myself. I didn't care. And long story short, 2 years later, I became a believer, but it was all believing in the understanding that I am not in control, that I serve one master or the other. That was the revelation for me.
Wow. That's powerful. And it just shows that God plants seeds along the way, and He's with you the whole time.
Yep.
Eventually, you come to that point where you got to choose left or right.
Yep.
And so we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
So I hate to
No,
wrap
you're good.
it up. So 30-second elevator pitch. Why should somebody get involved and come to Karitos?
Well, I would say there are so many people out there that have a story where they don't necessarily connect with their own church, or what they're expected to be as an artist. And so Karitos is really made for the people that don't necessarily know what God is calling them into, as far as the depth of ministry. They may know they're a painter, they may know they're a singer, but I think you were talking about Randall Flynn and how he was talking about orphan artists. That some level they feel orphaned, and they need fellowship with people that kind of get them. And I would say Karitos is a place that really embraces that to a level that I've never seen anywhere else. It's an experience that you really won't see anywhere else. When you bring a bunch of artists together and they have the freedom that Karitos offers, it's just beautiful. Many people have talked about it being a touch of heaven. And I think just being in the presence of God, and the Holy Spirit just running in such freedom, it's in a powerful experience, and most people don't ever leave there the same. They have some kind of revelation connection that's similar to what we were sharing we've had. And I think the reason they should come is because they want to become more of what God's created them to be.
Very good. We'll have links to Karitos and One Heart Arts in our show notes. Zach and Susannah, thank you so much for coming on and being so open and honest about your testimonies. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.